Welcome to our video on the top 10 serial killers who have never been caught. Throughout history, there have been a number of notorious murderers who have evaded capture, leaving law enforcement and the public to speculate about their identity and motives. From the infamous Zodiac Killer to the still unidentified Long Island serial killer, these cases continue to fascinate and terrify us. Join us as we explore the details of these chilling unsolved mysteries and try to shed light on some of the most elusive killers of all time. But before we get started, please make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified about our amazing upcoming informative videos. Now sit back, relax, and let's go. At number 10 we have the Babysitter Killer. The Oakland County child killer, also known as the Babysitter Killer, is an unidentified serial killer who murdered at least 4 children in Oakland County, Michigan, between 1976 and 1977. The killer's choice to target children gripped parents throughout Michigan and spawned dozens of neighborhood watch initiatives. Despite a few promising leads, including the discovery of a vehicle suspected to belong to the killer, the case remains open and unsolved. The most recent development was in 2012 when investigators managed to create a DNA profile of the killer, but it didn't match anyone arrested in conjunction with the case. But perhaps the most disturbing part, aside from the fact that the killer is still at large, is the extent of his abductions. All 4 children were held for anywhere from 4 to 19 days before being bathed and killed. Number 9. The Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is a stretch of highway in British Columbia, Canada, where many women, mostly Indigenous, have gone missing or been found murdered since the 1960s. The cases of these missing and murdered women have been investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, but many of them remain unsolved to this day. While it is suspected that there may be multiple killers responsible for the crimes, no one has ever been definitively identified or convicted. The Highway of Tears has become a symbol of the systemic issues facing Indigenous women in Canada and the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. Efforts continue to bring attention to the cases of the missing and murdered women along the Highway of Tears and to bring closure to the families and communities affected by these tragic crimes. Number 8. Bible John. Bible John was the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who was active in Glasgow, Scotland in the late 1960s. The killer was known for targeting young women who he met at dance halls, and for reciting passages from the Bible to them. Despite a massive police investigation, Bible John was never identified or caught, and the case remains one of Scotland's most infamous unsolved mysteries. Number 7. The Alphabet Killer. The Alphabet Killer was an unidentified serial killer who was active in Rochester, New York in the 1970s. The killer was named after his pattern of targeting victims whose names began with the same letter, and he is known to have murdered at least 3 young girls. Despite an extensive investigation by law enforcement, the Alphabet Killer was never identified or apprehended, and the case remains open to this day. Number 6. The West Mesa Bone Collector. The West Mesa Bone Collector is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who is believed to be responsible for the murders of at least 11 women in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The victims' remains were discovered in 2009 buried on a mesa on the outskirts of the city, and many of the women were involved in prostitution and had been reported missing. Despite an ongoing investigation and a $100,000 reward for information leading to an arrest, the identity of the West Mesa Bone Collector remains unknown. The case has become one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in New Mexico history, and it continues to haunt the families and communities affected by the killer's crimes. Number 5. The Servant Girl Annihilator. The Servant Girl Annihilator was an unidentified serial killer who terrorized Austin, Texas in the late 1800s. The killer is believed to have been responsible for at least 8 brutal murders, primarily targeting young women who worked as domestic servants. The Servant Girl Annihilator was notorious for his savagery and the seemingly random nature of his attacks, and his crimes caused widespread panic in Austin. Despite an intensive investigation by law enforcement, the killer was never identified or caught, and the case remains one of the oldest unsolved serial murder cases in American history. Number 4. The Long Island Killer. The Long Island Killer, also known as the Gilgo Beach Killer, is an unidentified serial killer who is believed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 10 people in Long Island, New York. The killer's victims were primarily young women involved in prostitution, and their remains were discovered in 2010 and 2011 in and around the Gilgo Beach area. Despite a massive investigation by law enforcement, the Long Island killer has never been identified or apprehended, and the case remains one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in New York State history. Number 3. The Black Doodler. The Black Doodler was a serial killer who was active in San Francisco in the 1970s. The killer is known to have targeted young men in the city's gay community, and he was named the Black Doodler because of his habit of sketching his victims before murdering them. Despite being a suspect in at least 14 murders, the Black Doodler was never apprehended or identified, and the case remains open to this day. Number 2. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The killer was known for taunting law enforcement and the public with cryptic messages and codes sent to newspapers and the police. Despite a massive investigation and numerous suspects, the Zodiac Killer was never identified or caught, and the case remains one of the most infamous unsolved serial murder cases in American history. The killer's true identity and motives continue to be the subject of speculation and debate, and the case has inspired numerous books, movies, and television shows. The Zodiac Killer's legacy as a cold and calculating murderer, and his ability to evade capture and remain a mystery to this day, continue to fascinate and terrify people around the world. Number 1. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer who terrorized the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. The killer's victims were all women who worked as prostitutes, and they were brutally mutilated and left in public places. Despite an extensive investigation and numerous suspects, Jack the Ripper was never identified or caught, and the case remains one of the most infamous unsolved serial murder cases in history. The killer's identity, motives, and ultimate fate continue to be the subject of much speculation and debate, and the case has become an enduring symbol of the dark side of Victorian London. Jack the Ripper's chilling legacy as a cold and calculating murderer, and his ability to evade capture and remain a mystery to this day, continue to captivate the public imagination over a century later. In conclusion, the cases of serial killers who have never been caught continue to fascinate and terrify people around the world. These mysterious killers were able to evade capture and remain anonymous, leaving a trail of terror and heartbreak in their wake. While law enforcement and investigators have made progress in many of these cases, the true identities of these killers continue to elude us. As we continue to search for answers and closure, we are reminded of the importance of vigilance and of the work that remains to be done to keep our communities safe. Thank you for watching. And please don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos on fascinating people and topics.